All right, let's talk BYU football. You probably saw the news over the weekend. An incredible stunner on July 4th is five-star offensive tackle Felix Ojo announced he is committed to, wait for it, the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Now, his agent, Derek Shelby, announced shortly after, I think, that a commitment became official, that his client had signed what he said was a 3-year, wait for it, $5.1 million contract with the Texas Red Raiders that he said is fully guaranteed. Now, some reporting has come out since then with sources at Texas Tech saying the actual deal is a guarantee of $775,000 annually in revenue share payments. So that comes out to $2.3 million. But there is other apparently clauses in the contract that he has signed with Texas Tech that could take it north of $5 million. That's an incredible amount of money. But the question is, are the BYU Cougars willing, A, and B, capable of competing if Texas Tech is going to do this with players out there? Now, the biggest thing is that, as they say here, the reason why the contract could be taken, the escalating total value, this comes from the Athletic, of the contract in the $5 million range is if there is a large jump in the revenue sharing cap for schools, because obviously that could help pay out because he's, I think, guaranteed a certain percentage of said cap, but also if there has been minimal regulation of NIL institution in 2021, that if that continues, it's challenged in court, it's done away with, the NCAA or this new college sports commission simply don't have the teeth to enforce the new rules on anybody. That's what Texas Tech seems to be banking on here, either a major jump in the cap or having just the Wild West return in college football. My belief is that BYU is fully intent on competing as best they possibly can in the NIL era. We all saw BYU got a lot of, I guess you'd call it notoriety or pub or publicity, whatever you want to term it, when NIL became a thing. And BYU, particularly with basketball, was splashing the cash on guys like AJ DeBonsa. But that's obviously translated over into BYU football with some of the high-level prospects that have also joined BYU in recent months. To my knowledge, BYU has not signed a deal that lucrative with anybody in the BYU football program. But if BYU is willing to compete, they're going to have to be willing to go to that level. Speaking of a guy like Felix Ojo, and maybe guaranteeing him as much as 3 years and in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, to get talent into this program. I think BYU, that what was the guy's name? Was trying to think. It was I remember what the last name was, but he talked with ESPN and used the quote, "We won't be outbid." Well, if BYU is not going to be outbid, this might be kind of the new era for five-star talents. Did BYU pay this much for a guy like Ryder Lyons when he committed to BYU? Only he knows, because BYU is not ever, and I'll be very blunt about this, going to release the terms of their NIL contracts. If players or their agents are willing to do so, that may glean some insight, but they're very reticent to do so. In the case of this with Felix Ojo, his agent would not release the actual contract to the Athletic to get an actual look at what the numbers say in the contract he had. They were going off what sources said at Texas Tech. But the bigger point to be made here is BYU is stepping into a whole new era in college football. They've been very competitive to this point, but how much more is it going to take to remain competitive in this space? Because that's an incredible amount of money for an offensive tackle. And I've said it before, and I'll reiterate it here, that BYU, their overall strategy when it comes to NIL and their revenue share, which I'm expecting somewhere around 80% probably goes to the BYU football program. So if you want to take that $20.5 million cap number, let's just shorten it to $20 million for conversation purpose. 80% of that is $16 million. So let's just say that's how much money that Dave George, as the GM of BYU football, and Kalani Sitake as the head coach, have to allot to their players. The way that BYU is approaching this is they're going about it the way the NFL does. And what the NFL does is they value different positions at different levels. Obviously, offensive tackles are worth a certain amount. They're not worth as much as quarterbacks. They're maybe not as worth as much as edge players, but they're not far off. If Felix Ojo is worth north of $775,000 annually, that seems like it's out of the range of what I think most programs are willing to spend on an offensive tackle. But I can guarantee you that there are agents out there for these players who are saying, okay, that number holds true. What's my guy worth going forward? That's the situation at hand here. Is BYU has to be very strategic in how they allot this money to different players, because everybody's going to have their hand out at every single turn saying, hey, I want more money. Are players going to be willing to hold out at some point? That's a big question I have about this as well. Let's say, for example, that Felix Ojo, at some point over the next 3 years, he's playing for Texas Tech. He's a member of the 2026 recruiting class, so he would not enroll until next January at the earliest. So we're talking 2026, 2027, 2028. Over the next 3 years, if he is not paid out his full allotment, whether that's $775,000 or north of $1 million, depending on which of the contracts and the reports that you believe, is he going to be willing to sit out and say, "Hey, until I'm paid up, I'm not playing"? That's a huge question mark. And it's got to be something that BYU and as well as the rest of college football have got to be considering when it comes to dealing with this. It's a crazy era. And as many of us often say, many you probably have heard, well, money talks. And this is a crazy, crazy world that it seems like the costs of playing at this level seem to only be going up. No matter what they say when it came to that house settlement coming into effect, and it's put guardrails on the house settlement. What Felix Ojo just signed here with what Texas Tech did is essentially kind of snubbed their nose in the face of the house settlement and said, "Hey, try and enforce those rules on us. We'll see how that ends up in court." If Texas Tech is willing to splash this much money, I'll guarantee you that the Texases, the Ohio States that lost out in this race, well, now they know what the going rate may be to compete at this level. How much further are people willing to go? How much further are they going to be willing to spend? How much more are they going to be willing to spend to stay competitive in this world? And if BYU wants to continue to be that force that they are in college football and be a program that is noted for its willingness to spend money on talent, man, the stakes seem to only be getting more and more expensive. And at some point, it does feel like there's a breaking point. But at the same time, I just look at what professional sports are, and it seems like all they're doing is printing money every other year. It feels like when a new media rights deal or a new sale of a team. We just had the who am I thinking of? The Los Angeles Lakers, $10 billion. Absolute insane number to pay for a professional sports franchise. But once again, it just feels like the cost of doing business in sports is only getting more expensive. And hey, I will add this. If BYU's boosters want to continue to flash the cash and be a force in the NIL space, well, that means that BYU will remain in the race and will still continue to kind of, as I said, for some people, it's notoriety. For BYU, it's good pub. I've said it once, I'll say it again. BYU looks like, for example, the AJ DeBonsa deal, whether you believe he's making $5, $6, or $7 million, those are the different reports out there about how much NIL money he was getting from BYU. Well, I can tell you, BYU expects to get at least tenfold back in publicity from AJ DeBonsa. And part of that was, we'll talk about here momentarily, is him shining on the international stage for the USA junior national team with the U19s that won a gold medal this past weekend. It's a kind of a give and take, and you have to determine how willing you are to play in the sandbox that BYU has been competing in and how much longer they're willing to stay in said sandbox. But if what their boosters have been saying is to be believed, that means BYU's in it to win it. And I guess this is the new price of doing business, because apparently $5 million for an offensive tackle is the new going rate, which is crazy. But at the same time, you can guarantee that other agents, they're going to be flashing that number in the face of other programs, BYU included, when it comes to their clients in future negotiations.